is Talk.
Well, the controversy over the Gaza documentary that the BBC pulled from the iPlayer continues, and now the 14-year-old boy involved, Abdullah al-Yazuri from Gaza, he contributed, in fact narrated it. There are all sorts of problems with it, of course, and guess what? He's the son of a Hamas terrorist. The BBC is trying to work this all out, trying to do a big inquiry into it and work out what on earth happened in the first place. It's a massive scandal, and it's emerged that £790 of your money, licence fee payers' money, was paid to this 14-year-old's sister. His father is called Ayman al-Yazuri. He is the Deputy Agriculture Minister in the Hamas-run government. Hamas are terrorists. Hamas are running Gaza. Well, they're not running it particularly at the moment, but certainly his father is a Hamas terrorist. This was not disclosed at any point, and Abdullah, the 14-year-old, says, I was very impartial in this documentary. Sorry to burst your bubble, Abdullah, I'm not sure you were. And he said his family have been targeted by cyberbullying, harassment and all kinds of things. Well, his father is a Hamas terrorist. He has stood over the actions of Hamas terrorists in maiming, in killing, in the 7th of October attacks, which were absolutely horrendous, in all that Hamas have done since, in holding hostages, in killing civilians. So you'll forgive me if my heart doesn't bleed for this very privileged 14-year-old who's gone to an incredibly expensive school and is the sort of scion of a Hamas terrorist dynasty. The BBC is in a lot of trouble about this as well. Natasha Hausdorff is a barrister and also legal director at UK Lawyers for Israel. I want to talk to Natasha about what Trump has told Hamas, which is pretty direct and I think a very good message, but we'll talk about that in a second. Specifically on the Hamas chief's son, he says the BBC are responsible if anything happens to me. Are you as sympathetic as I am?
Well, in light of the manner in which the BBC have served as a Hamas mouthpiece for the last 16 months at least, I think there is a responsibility on them for the suffering of Palestinians in general, in encouraging Hamas, of course, to continue its war against Israelis and in dragging out and perpetuating this conflict. So far more so than
you actually blame the BBC for helping perpetuate this conflict. That's a huge charge, Natasha.
But justifiably so, when one looks at the way in which Hamas propaganda has been coming out of the BBC, and undoubtedly, as I have been hearing in meetings with officials, policymakers and politicians all around the world, that they are basing their opinions on the developing situation in the Middle East and specifically in Gaza, on what they are witnessing on the BBC, when we recognise that nothing comes out of Gaza that hasn't been approved by Hamas in the way of reporting. And when the BBC, and they're not alone in this, but when the BBC, which is supposed to hold up a standard that is recognisable around the world for honesty and journalistic integrity, when they fail to communicate to their viewership that they are constrained in what they are able to report and that what is being put out is everything that Hamas wishes the world to see.
They're constrained by Israel as well, though, aren't they? Because Israel say that they're not allowed to be in Gaza as well. It's not just Hamas.
Well, let's just be clear about that. There is freedom of press in Israel. There are no restrictions other than very necessary military censorship, as there has been, of course, in the UK when we in Great Britain were similarly engaged in armed conflict. So there is entire freedom of press. What the contrast of this is, and of course it's not just Hamas, I mean there are examples of it also with respect to Lebanon and Hezbollah, and in that respect, let me give you this example. I know journalist colleagues who have embedded with the IDF in Lebanon, who have been amongst other journalists who have made it perfectly clear they need to be very careful about what they report because of their colleagues in Beirut and because of essentially what Hezbollah will do to them if they report the wrong thing. Yeah. So where you have reportage coming out of areas that are controlled by terrorist organisations, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, there is a responsibility on journalists with integrity to indicate that this is not free reporting. And this latest BBC documentary, which understandably has caused so much of a stir, exposed as it was by the brilliant investigative journalism of David Collier, that is just the tip of the iceberg. It is reflective of an attitude amongst journalists broadly. The BBC is perhaps chiefly responsible here because of the higher standards that it is meant to uphold, of simply parroting what they are being told by terrorist organisations, and this has to stop.
Just quickly, I just want to ask you about the Trump on social media, on Truth Social. He has issued a last warning to Hamas after the US opened unprecedented talks with the terrorist group, and Adam Bowler, who is his envoy for hostage affairs, actually met Hamas terrorists in Qatar. He wrote on social media, President Trump did, "Shalom, Hamas means hello and goodbye. You can choose. Release all of the hostages now, not later, and immediately return all of the dead bodies of the people you murdered, or it's over for you. Only sick and twisted people keep bodies, and you are sick and twisted."
I'd say some 16 months too late. If only we'd heard that from the previous administration at the very start of this conflict on the 7th of October, when these people were brutally abducted and others were murdered, raped, tortured. It is important that the civilized world sends a very clear message to savages like Hamas, like Hezbollah, who have absolutely no thought for human life and who celebrate death. And that we tell these death cults that they will not be successful in their efforts to target civilians, but also importantly to target Western civilization more broadly.
Natasha, thank you. That's Natasha Hausdorff, who is a barrister and legal director of UK Lawyers for Israel.
This is Talk.